Some scars never show on the surface, but they're the ones that change you forever. This is the story of how I discovered my strength in the most painful way possible. Before I continue my story, I'd like to ask you to hit that subscribe button right now if you enjoy real stories of struggle and triumph. Also, please give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support means the world to me and helps more people find these true stories of strength through hardship. My name is Dorothy Wilson, and I'm 82 years old now. Back in 1954, when I was just 21, I thought I had everything figured out. I was the oldest of 3 daughters in a respectable middle-class family from Springfield, Massachusetts. My father worked at the local paper mill, and my mother kept our home immaculate while raising us girls to be proper ladies. I still remember the smell of her lavender perfume mixing with the scent of apple pie cooling on the windowsill every Sunday. I met Richard at a church social when I was 19. He had just returned from serving in Korea, tall and handsome in his uniform with that confident smile that made all the girls swoon. But he chose me. Richard Thompson was going places, smart, ambitious, with a business degree thanks to the GI Bill. When he proposed after just 6 months of courtship, I didn't hesitate. My mother cried tears of joy as she helped me into my wedding dress, whispering that I had caught the best fish in the pond. Our wedding was the social event of the spring of 1952. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace and a dress with so many layers of tulle I could barely fit through the church doors. My younger sisters, Ruth and Betty, were my bridesmaids. Betty was only 17 then, still in high school, her golden curls bouncing as she giggled through the ceremony. She was always the pretty one, the one people noticed first with her bright blue eyes and infectious laugh. I never thought much about how Richard's gaze lingered on her during family gatherings. I was too busy being the perfect wife. We moved into a little starter home in the new development on the edge of town. Richard got a position at Morris Manufacturing, and I kept our home just like my mother had taught me. I ironed his shirts with perfect creases, prepared his favorite pot roast every Thursday, and never complained when he came home late from business meetings. By 1957, we had 2 beautiful children, David and Linda, and had moved to a larger house in the better part of town. Richard was climbing the corporate ladder faster than anyone expected, becoming the youngest department manager in company history. From the outside, we were the American dream come to life. Our Christmas card photos showed a handsome husband, a smiling wife in a perfectly pressed dress, and 2 golden-haired children posed in front of our brick colonial home. We joined the country club in 1960, and Richard golfed with the company executives every Saturday while I attended ladies' luncheons and charity committee meetings. I was living the life my mother had prepared me for. At least, that's what I thought. Betty never married. She went to secretarial school and moved into an apartment downtown. She visited often, bringing gifts for the children and always staying for dinner. "Poor Betty," my mother would say. "She just hasn't found the right man yet." Betty became a fixture at our family gatherings, always willing to babysit or help with holidays. Richard insisted we include her, saying it was the charitable thing to do. I never suspected his motives weren't purely familial. The first hint came in 1963. I found a matchbook from the Starlight Motel in Richard's jacket pocket while doing the laundry. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, saying they had taken a client there for drinks. I believed him because that's what good wives did. They trusted their husbands. The lipstick on his collar 3 months later was explained away as an accident when his secretary tripped. The late nights became more frequent, often stretching past midnight. I kept my suspicions buried deep inside, focusing instead on my children and my volunteer work at the hospital. I started taking typing classes at the community college, telling Richard it was just to keep my mind sharp while the children were at school. In reality, something inside me knew I might need those skills someday. It was the first small act of rebellion in my perfectly orchestrated life. In March of 1965, I planned a surprise for Richard's 36th birthday. I made arrangements with his secretary to clear his afternoon schedule so I could take him to lunch at his favorite steakhouse. When I arrived at Morris Manufacturing at noon, his secretary looked confused. "Mr. Thompson called in this morning, said he was feeling under the weather and would be working from home today." A chill ran through me as I smiled and thanked her, pretending I had forgotten. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I would say when I found him there, probably just working on reports as he claimed. But our driveway was empty. On a hunch, I drove past Betty's apartment building downtown. There was his car, parked brazenly in the visitor's spot. I sat in my Buick for nearly an hour, watching the building entrance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When they emerged together, laughing, his arm around her waist in a way that was unmistakably intimate, something broke inside me. They kissed before he got into his car, not a familial peck on the cheek, but a passionate embrace that told me everything I needed to know. I didn't confront them. Not then. Instead, I drove home, prepared Richard's favorite dinner, and acted as if nothing had happened when he arrived home claiming he'd been in bed with a migraine all day. As I watched him eat the pot roast I had prepared with such care, listening to him lie so effortlessly, I made a decision. Dorothy Thompson would no longer be the fool in this story. That night, after Richard fell asleep, I stood at our bedroom window, looking out at the quiet suburban street lined with identical houses filled with wives who might be just like me, living perfect lies. I promised myself that whatever happened next, I would never again be the woman who didn't know, who didn't act, who accepted pretty falsehoods over ugly truths. My mother had raised me to be a good wife, but she never taught me what to do when being good wasn't enough. Little did Richard know that his betrayal had planted a seed in me, one that would grow into the most elaborate revenge a 1960s housewife could imagine. And it would begin with a simple job application at the very law firm that handled all of Morris Manufacturing's legal affairs. As spring turned to summer in 1965, I transformed from Dorothy Thompson, the perfect suburban housewife, into someone I barely recognized in the mirror, a woman with purpose beyond casseroles and carpools. The law firm of Hastings, Miller & Cohen occupied the entire 5th floor of the tallest building downtown, its mahogany-paneled reception area intimidating by design. I wore my best blue suit with a silk scarf at the neck, clutching my freshly typed resume in trembling hands. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Cohen said, reviewing my application with skeptical eyes, "your typing skills are adequate, but we typically hire younger women without family obligations." His emphasis on the last two words made his meaning clear. Married women with children weren't considered reliable employees. "My children are in school all day, Mr. Cohen," I replied with a calm I didn't feel. "And I believe reliability is demonstrated, not assumed." I paused before adding, "I also believe you handle the contract work for Morris Manufacturing, where my husband is a department manager." His eyebrows raised slightly. Mentioning Richard was a calculated risk. I knew the partners valued their corporate connections. "We might have a position in our filing department," he offered. 3 days a week, minimum wage. It wasn't the secretarial position I'd applied for, but it was a foot in the door. "When can I start?" I asked, already formulating the lie I'd tell Richard about joining a new charity committee. That first day in the filing room felt like stepping into another world, surrounded by towering cabinets filled with manila folders, breathing in the scent of paper and ink instead of floor wax and pot roast. I felt strangely liberated. Mrs. Grayson, a widow in her 60s who supervised the filing department, regarded me with suspicion. "Why would a woman like you want this job?" she asked bluntly during our lunch break in the employee kitchenette. "Your husband's a big shot at Morris, isn't he? I've seen him when he comes for meetings with the partners." I considered my answer carefully. "Let's just say I need something that's mine alone," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. She studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Well, if you're going to stay, you might as well learn properly." From that day forward, Mrs. Grayson became my unexpected ally, teaching me the intricate filing system that organized the legal lives of half the businesses in town. By fall, I had access to most of the firm's archives, including, crucially, the corporate documents for Morris Manufacturing. I stayed late whenever I could, claiming charity meetings to Richard, who barely noticed my absences as he was frequently working late himself. I studied those documents with an intensity that surprised even me, learning about shareholder agreements, property transfers, and the legal foundations of corporate ownership. One October evening, Mr. Miller found me reading through a thick folder of property law precedents long after everyone else had gone home. "Ambitious for the filing room, Mrs. Thompson," he remarked with amusement. Just trying to understand how everything fits together, sir, I replied, heart pounding at being discovered. Instead of reprimanding me, he leaned against the desk. Cohen mentioned you're Richard Thompson's wife. When I nodded, he continued. I played golf with him at the club last weekend. He never mentioned his wife worked here. He doesn't know, I admitted. I'd appreciate your discretion. He studied me with newfound interest. You know, we're looking for a paralegal who understands property law. The position requires evening classes at the community college, but it pays better than filing. The opportunity was unexpected, but perfect. By Christmas 1965, I was enrolled in paralegal courses 3 evenings a week. To Richard, I had joined the hospital board and a literacy program for underprivileged children, excuses for my frequent absences that played to his vanity about having a charitable wife. He boasted about my volunteer work to his colleagues, even as he spent those same evenings with my sister. Betty's betrayal cut deeper than Richard's. She visited our home every Sunday for dinner, playing with my children, accepting my hospitality while looking me in the eye, and lying. Sometimes I caught them exchanging glances across the table, their secret communication a language I wasn't meant to understand. Each smile they shared fueled my determination. At the law firm, I flourished. The paralegal position gave me access to the mechanics of wealth and property, how assets could be transferred, how ownership could be hidden or revealed. Mr. Miller became something of a mentor, impressed by my quick grasp of legal concepts and meticulous attention to detail. You have a natural mind for this work, he told me after I helped organize a particularly complex property transfer. Most paralegals take years to develop your level of understanding. What he didn't know was that I studied each night after Richard fell asleep, poring over legal textbooks by flashlight like a spy learning enemy codes. I was fighting for my future in the only way I knew how, with quiet determination and painstaking preparation. By the summer of 1966, I had my next move planned. Richard had been investing in various properties around town, using the bonuses from his recent promotion. As his wife, I had signed many documents without questioning them. Now, with my newfound knowledge, I reviewed copies of everything I could access through the firm's records. I discovered Richard had purchased 3 rental properties in a developing area north of town, but only one was in our joint names. The others were listed under Morris Holdings, a separate entity Richard had created with unnamed partners. I strongly suspected Betty was involved, perhaps being set up for a future together. In August, Richard announced he needed to attend a week-long conference in Chicago. It's an important opportunity, he explained, not meeting my eyes. The vice president position is opening up next year, and this will put me in consideration. I smiled and promised to manage everything at home. The moment his flight departed, I drove to Betty's apartment and used the spare key she'd given us for emergencies to let myself in. The evidence was everywhere. Richard's favorite scotch on her bar cart, his monogrammed cufflinks on her dresser, photographs of them together hidden in her nightstand drawer. One showed them at the Starlight Motel, dated 3 years earlier. The betrayal had been going on far longer than I'd imagined. I didn't take anything or leave any sign of my visit. Instead, I drove to the county records office and requested copies of all documents related to Morris Holdings. The clerk, a woman about my age named Judith, looked apologetic. Those records require a court order or owner's consent to access, she explained. I leaned closer. Judith, my husband created that company, possibly with my sister, while they've been having an affair for years. I have 2 children to protect. It was the first time I'd spoken the truth aloud to anyone. Her expression shifted. The records room closes at 5, she said quietly. I take my break at 4:30. The M section is 3rd shelf from the bottom, row 14. That afternoon changed everything. Morris Holdings wasn't just for rental properties. It was where Richard had been channeling significant portions of his income, presumably to build a life with Betty that didn't include me. But he had made one critical mistake. On the original incorporation documents, filed before their affair began, he had listed me as a 40% owner, likely to avoid certain tax implications. Armed with this knowledge, I made an appointment with Mr. Miller, not as an employee, but as a client. When I showed him what I'd found, he whistled softly. "Dorothy, are you sure you want to pursue this?" he asked. These matters often get messy, especially with family involved. I've been living in mess for years without knowing it, I replied. I'd rather face it consciously now. Throughout fall and winter of 1966, I worked with Mr. Miller to methodically document everything. We traced money movements, property acquisitions, and evidence of the affair. Meanwhile, at home, I maintained the perfect facade, hosting Richard's business associates for dinner, attending company functions on his arm, and even inviting Betty for holidays. By early 1967, Richard was on the verge of his vice president promotion, completely unaware that his wife now understood every aspect of his financial life, and had begun strategically rearranging it. Using my legal position and the 40% ownership of Morris Holdings, I quietly initiated transfers that would eventually consolidate assets under my control. "You're playing a dangerous game," Mrs. Grayson warned me one afternoon after observing my focused determination. "Men like your husband don't lose gracefully." "This isn't a game," I replied, looking up from the document I was preparing. "It's survival." What Richard and Betty never understood was that I wasn't just fighting for money or property. I was reclaiming my dignity piece by piece, document by document. In their arrogance, they believed I was too simple, too devoted to my role as wife and mother, to comprehend their deception. Their underestimation would be their downfall. As winter melted into spring of 1967, I finalized my preparations. Richard's 38th birthday was approaching in March, traditionally celebrated with a party at our home for colleagues and friends. This year, I planned something special. It would be a gathering no one would forget, least of all my husband and my sister. March 15, 1967, dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that gave no hint of the storm I was about to unleash. Richard's 38th birthday celebration was scheduled for 7 o'clock that evening. I'd invited 30 guests, his colleagues from Morris Manufacturing, our neighbors, friends from the country club, and of course family, including Betty. I spent the day preparing with unusual care. The house gleamed from top to bottom. Fresh flowers adorned every room. I'd ordered his favorite German chocolate cake from Pearson's Bakery downtown, where they knew exactly how he liked the coconut frosting. The dining room table was set with our best china and crystal, wedding gifts that now seemed like artifacts from another woman's life. At 5 o'clock, I stood before my bedroom mirror, applying lipstick with a steady hand. I'd chosen a new dress for the occasion, not my usual pastel shift, but a sleek royal blue sheath that hugged my figure in a way Richard hadn't seen in years. My hair was styled in a more modern cut, inspired by Jackie Kennedy's elegant bob. The transformation wasn't just physical. Something in my eyes had changed, a newfound hardness that came from 13 months of meticulous planning. "Mom, you look different," Linda said, appearing in the doorway in her party dress. At 12, she was beginning to notice things with a young woman's perception. "Sometimes change is necessary, sweetheart," I replied, adjusting my pearl necklace, the same one I'd worn on my wedding day. "Would you check if David is ready? Guests will arrive soon." By 6:30, Mr. Miller had arrived, ostensibly as a guest, but really as my legal witness. His presence was my insurance policy. Richard greeted him with surprise but obvious pleasure, assuming the senior partner's attendance indicated good things for Morris Manufacturing's relationship with the firm. If only he knew. Betty arrived at 6:45, wearing a dress I recognized from our shopping trip last month. A trip during which she'd pretended to help me select a gift for Richard, while knowing she was the one truly sharing his life. She kissed my cheek and handed me a wrapped package. "You've outdone yourself, Dot," she said, glancing around at the elaborate preparations. "The place looks wonderful." "I wanted everything to be perfect," I replied, my smile never reaching my eyes. "Tonight is special." Richard made his entrance at 7 sharp, fresh from work in his best suit, playing the role of surprised birthday boy, although we'd had this party on the same date for years. He accepted congratulations and handshakes with practiced charm, his arm occasionally brushing against Betty's as they circulated through the crowd separately but in obvious unconscious orbit of each other. Dinner was served at 8. Crown roast with all the trimmings, served by a catering staff I'd hired for the evening, another departure from my usual home-cooked affairs. Richard raised his eyebrows at this extravagance, but seemed pleased by the impression it made on his colleagues. I watched him holding court at the head of the table, so confident in his position, so certain of his control over our lives. After dinner, as guests mingled in the living room with cocktails, I nodded to Mrs. Grayson, who had arrived late as planned. She slipped upstairs unnoticed and returned minutes later with a subtle nod. Everything was in place. At 9:30, I tapped a spoon against my crystal glass, calling for attention. The room quieted as all eyes turned to me. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Richard's birthday," I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. After 15 years of marriage, I've learned that surprises keep the relationship exciting. A knowing chuckle rippled through the room. Richard smiled indulgently from his armchair, scotch in hand. "What have you been up to, Dorothy?" he asked, a hint of genuine curiosity breaking through his practiced affection. "I've prepared a special gift this year," I continued, smiling. "One that reflects the true nature of our partnership." Mrs. Grayson appeared at my side with a large, wrapped package, which I placed on the coffee table in front of Richard. The room watched with anticipation as he unwrapped it, revealing a leather portfolio embossed with the Morris Manufacturing logo. "Open it," I encouraged, as confusion flickered across his face. Inside were documents, dozens of them, meticulously organized with color-coded tabs. His expression froze as he recognized the Morris Holdings letterhead on the first page. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Just the paperwork documenting your transfer of controlling interest in Morris Holdings to me," I replied conversationally, as though discussing the weather. "Along with the deed transfers for the rental properties on Maple Street and Oak Avenue." The color drained from his face. Across the room, Betty's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up. All eyes were fixed on the unfolding drama. "There must be some mistake," Richard said, attempting a laugh that sounded more like a gasp. "Dorothy doesn't know anything about business matters." "On the contrary," Mr. Miller interjected smoothly, stepping forward. "Mrs. Thompson has developed quite an expertise in corporate law over the past year. These transfers are completely legitimate, signed by you, notarized, and properly filed." Confused murmurs spread through the room as guests tried to make sense of the situation. Richard flipped frantically through the portfolio, his composure crumbling with each page. "You can't do this," he hissed, low enough that only those closest could hear. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I replied, "just as I understand the nature of your business trips and late meetings." I turned to face our audience. "Friends, I apologize for the awkwardness, but since we're all here, family, friends, colleagues, I thought it would be efficient to announce some changes." From my pocket, I removed a small stack of photographs and held them up. "These are copies. I have the originals in a safe place." They clearly showed Richard and Betty entering and leaving the Starlight Motel on various dates, each one time-stamped and documented. A collective gasp swept through the room. Betty pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Richard lunged for the photos, but I stepped back smoothly. "Effective immediately," I continued, my voice ringing clear in the stunned silence. "I will be assuming management of Morris Holdings and its assets. I'll also be taking a more active role in our financial affairs." I paused, meeting Richard's gaze. "Including your position at Morris Manufacturing." "What are you talking about?" he sputtered. "Mr. Miller stepped forward again. "Mrs. Thompson now controls the 15% stake in Morris Manufacturing previously held by Morris Holdings. Combined with the shares already in her name from your joint portfolio, she now has significant influence with the board." The vice president of Morris Manufacturing, Chester Williams, set down his drink with a thud. "Is this true, Thompson? You've been running a shadow company using corporate connections?" Richard's face contorted with fury as his professional and personal lives imploded simultaneously. He turned to Betty in desperation, but she was already backing toward the door, her mascara streaming down her cheeks. "Dorothy, please," Richard said, his voice dropping to a pleading whisper. "We can discuss this privately. Whatever you want, what I want," I interrupted calmly, "is already in this portfolio, signed, sealed, and delivered." Mrs. Grayson appeared with a birthday cake ablaze with candles, setting it before Richard with grim satisfaction. "Make a wish, Mr. Thompson," she said. "I believe you'll need it." One by one, guests began making awkward excuses to leave. Richard's colleagues avoided eye contact, already distancing themselves from his downfall. Betty slipped out without saying goodbye, not even to me, her sister, whose life she had helped unravel thread by thread. Within 30 minutes, only Richard, the children, who had been upstairs until the cake, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Grayson, and I remained. David and Linda sensed the tension but didn't understand its source. "Can we eat cake now?" David asked, oblivious to the adult drama. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, cutting him a generous slice. "It's still a birthday after all." Richard watched numbly as his children enjoyed their cake, the reality of his situation sinking in. When they'd finished and gone back upstairs, he finally spoke. "What happens now?" he asked, all pretense gone. "Now," I said, sitting across from him, "we discuss terms. You can fight me and lose everything, including your reputation and career, or you can accept the new arrangement. Which is, we maintain appearances. You keep your job, for now, but with oversight from me. We live as a family while the children are at home. Your relationship with Betty ends today." I leaned forward. "In return, I don't share those photos with the board of directors or file for a very public divorce citing adultery." His hands shook as he closed the portfolio. "You've thought of everything." "I had excellent motivation," I replied, "and plenty of time while you were with my sister." After Mr. Miller and Mrs. Grayson departed, Richard and I sat in silence amid the debris of the party. Dirty glasses, half-eaten cake, and the shattered remains of the life we'd pretended to have. "I never thought you were capable of this," he finally said, a mix of fear and reluctant admiration in his voice. "That was your mistake," I replied, standing to begin clearing the table. One of many. That night, Richard slept in the guest room. I lay awake in our bed, neither triumphant nor devastated, just resolute. The road ahead would be difficult, navigating a marriage that was now more business arrangement than relationship, protecting my children from the full ugly truth, and rebuilding my life on my own terms. But for the first time since finding Richard's car outside Betty's apartment, I felt something like peace. Not because I had won, there were no winners in this sad story, but because I had refused to be a silent victim. The 1950s housewife I'd been raised to be had transformed into something else entirely. A woman who would never again mistake submission for virtue or silence for strength. As dawn broke on March 16, 1967, Dorothy Thompson, dutiful wife, betrayed sister, underestimated woman, ceased to exist. In her place stood Dorothy Wilson Thompson, architect of her own destiny and captain of a ship she'd wrested from treacherous hands. The journey wasn't over, but at least now I was the one charting the course. The morning after Richard's birthday, our home felt like a battlefield gone silent. Breakfast was a wordless affair, Richard avoiding my eyes, the children sensing tension but unable to name it. When he left for work, his kiss on my cheek was mechanical, a performance for the children rather than a gesture of affection. As the front door closed behind him, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. Had I gone too far? The answer came swiftly as I remembered Betty's tearful escape from the party. No, I had only just begun. That spring unfolded differently than any in my married life. Richard maintained a cool distance, coming home exactly at 6, making appropriate small talk at dinner, and retreating to the guest room, which had officially become Dad's study in our family fiction. The children accepted this explanation without question, having grown accustomed to their father's emotional absence long before his physical one. Betty left town without a goodbye. Her apartment was emptied overnight, and a forwarding address filed with the post office led to Seattle, as far from Massachusetts as she could reasonably go. My mother called, confused by Betty's sudden departure. "She said it was a job opportunity," Mom explained, her voice tinny through the telephone line. "But it all happened so fast. Did you two have a falling out?" "Something like that," I replied, unwilling to shatter my mother's world with the truth. She was 72 now. Some burdens were mine alone to carry. At Morris Manufacturing, Richard's position became increasingly precarious. Chester Williams, the vice president who had attended the birthday party, called me to his office in late April, an unprecedented move that sent ripples through the company gossip mill. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted me, rising from behind his imposing desk. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Williams," I replied, taking the offered seat with the confident posture I'd practiced in my mirror. I appreciate your discretion in this matter. He studied me with new respect, so different from the condescending pats on the arm I'd received at company Christmas parties over the years. I'll be direct. The board is concerned about Richard's personal entanglements affecting company judgment. That real estate venture skirts several ethical boundaries. I understand completely, I said. That's why I've dissolved Morris Holdings and restructured the assets. The documentation is with your legal department. He looked startled. You've been busy. Necessity is quite motivating, Mr. Williams. He nodded slowly. The vice presidency Richard was angling for. It's no longer a possibility for him. I assumed as much. However, he continued, leaning forward, we value stability and discretion. If Richard accepts a lateral move to the Philadelphia office, we can avoid any messy public situations. The company would, of course, assist with relocation expenses. The offer surprised me, not just for its generosity, but for its timing. You've given this considerable thought. The board meets weekly, Mrs. Thompson, he replied with a slight smile. This matter has been our primary discussion since your illuminating birthday celebration. That evening, I presented the Philadelphia option to Richard as we sat in the living room after the children went to bed, our new ritual of civilized negotiation. Philadelphia? He repeated, swirling ice in his Scotch glass. That's your solution? It's the board's solution, I corrected calmly. The alternative is dismissal, possibly with legal consequences, depending on what else they find when they start looking closer at Morris Holdings. He drained his glass. And what about you and the children? Am I supposed to move alone? I had anticipated this question. We'll maintain 2 households. The children will finish the school year here, then join you for the summer. We'll evaluate more permanent arrangements in the fall. You've thought of everything, he said bitterly. Not everything, I replied. Just the next necessary steps. Richard accepted the Philadelphia transfer, presenting it to friends and family as a significant career opportunity. By June, he had rented an apartment there, returning to Springfield on alternate weekends. The arrangement gave me space to breathe and plan my next moves. In July 1967, I secured a full-time position at Hastings, Miller & Cohen as their property law specialist, a newly created role that recognized my unique expertise. Mr. Miller had championed my appointment despite resistance from the other partners. A married woman with school-age children isn't a traditional hire, he admitted during my interview. But your work over the past year has been exceptional. We'd be fools to lose you to another firm. The salary was modest compared to Richard's, but combined with the income from the rental properties now under my management, it provided a foundation of independence I'd never before experienced. I opened my own bank account, an act that would have seemed treasonous in the early years of my marriage. When the children joined Richard in Philadelphia for the summer, I allowed myself 1 week of solitude in the house that had been my beautiful prison. I walked through empty rooms, touching furniture and photographs, confronting memories both sweet and painful. On the 7th day, I began making changes, repainting the master bedroom in a rich burgundy that Richard would have hated, replacing the floral curtains with clean, modern lines, moving furniture to create a home office in what had been Betty's guest room. By September, when Linda and David returned for the school year, they found not just a redecorated house, but a transformed mother. I was thinner, my wardrobe updated with structured dresses and tailored pants that scandalized some of the country club wives, but earned subtle nods of approval from younger women. I drove myself to work each morning, briefcase in hand, and returned in time to prepare dinner, proving that ambition and motherhood weren't mutually exclusive. Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced? Linda asked one evening as we washed dishes together. At 13, she was perceptive beyond her years. We're finding a new way to be a family, I answered carefully. Sometimes adults need space to figure things out. Is it because of Aunt Betty? She pressed, surprising me with her insight. When I didn't immediately answer, she continued. I saw them once, at the park, when they didn't know I was there. They were holding hands like you and Dad never do. My heart ached for her lost innocence. Adults make mistakes, sweetheart. Complicated ones. I like you better now, she said suddenly, her young face solemn. You smile with your eyes, not just your mouth. Her observation stayed with me. a touchstone during difficult moments in the months that followed. Richard fought the separation in subtle ways, forgetting to send child support checks, calling the children to complain of loneliness, making surprise visits that disrupted our new routines. Each manipulation was met with calm resolution on my part, our battles conducted through lawyers rather than raised voices. By spring 1968, the country was in turmoil over Vietnam and civil rights, and so was my personal life. Richard filed for divorce, claiming desertion, a laughable charge given the circumstances, but one that threatened my reputation and custody of the children. Mr. Miller represented me, countering with evidence of Richard's infidelity that had been carefully withheld until absolutely necessary. The morning Richard's lawyer received our response, complete with time-stamped photographs and hotel receipts spanning 3 years, the desertion claim was withdrawn. New terms were proposed, a clean break with generous child support and shared custody. "He's afraid," Mr. Miller explained, as we reviewed the offer in his office. "Not just of public exposure, but of what else you might have documented during your time at the firm." "Does his fear serve our purposes?" I asked pragmatically. "Admirably," he replied, with the ghost of a smile. The divorce was finalized in June 1968, notable for its generous terms, at a time when divorced women often faced financial ruin. I kept the Springfield house, the rental properties, and primary custody of the children. Richard's child support payments were substantial, secured by a lien against his pension. What I surrendered was insignificant by comparison. Some furniture, half the china, and the country club membership I'd grown to despise. The whispers followed me, of course. Divorce in 1968 still carried stigma, especially in suburban circles. Invitations dwindled. School mothers gave me wide berth, and Linda struggled with changing friendships as classmates were forbidden from visiting our now broken home. But for every closed door, unexpected windows opened. Carol Bennett, a recent widow who had moved next door, became an unlikely ally. In her late 40s with grown children, she had inherited her husband's insurance business and was determined to run it herself despite pressure to sell. "These old dinosaurs think a woman can't understand actuarial tables," she confided over coffee one morning. "Wait until they see my quarterly numbers." Through Carol, I met other women charting unconventional paths. A pharmacist who had taken over her father's business, a widow managing rental properties, a divorced teacher supporting 3 children. We formed an informal network, sharing childcare, business advice, and much-needed laughter. By 1970, my professional reputation had outgrown my divorce scandal. I was handling property transactions for several prominent businesses, had expanded the rental portfolio to 7 properties, and was teaching a night course on property law at the community college. The children spent alternate holidays with Richard, who had remarried a younger colleague from the Philadelphia office, a development that surprised no one, least of all me. In the summer of 1972, an unexpected letter arrived from Seattle bearing Betty's handwriting. For days, it sat unopened on my desk, a time bomb from the past I wasn't sure I wanted to detonate. When I finally broke the seal, her words poured out in familiar looping script. "Dorothy, I know no apology can ever be sufficient, but I need you to know how deeply I regret the pain I caused. Richard found me last year in Seattle. He wanted to restart what we had, even though he was remarried. I refused. Too late, I understood what kind of man he truly is and what kind of woman you are. I don't ask for forgiveness, only that someday you might think of me as something other than the worst mistake of your life. Your sister, Betty." I read it 3 times before placing it in my desk drawer. No response seemed adequate. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a process that might take the rest of our lives. For now, acknowledgement would have to be enough. In December 1973, Chester Williams called with an unexpected proposition. Morris Manufacturing was expanding into commercial real estate and needed someone to oversee their property acquisitions. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The company that had nearly been Richard's downfall now sought my expertise. "Would it be awkward for you, given the history?" Chester asked cautiously. "History makes for solid foundations when properly acknowledged," I replied. "I'd be interested in discussing terms." By early 1974, at 41 years old, I became Morris Manufacturing's first female executive, Director of Property Development. My office featured large windows overlooking downtown Springfield, a far cry from the windowless filing room where my transformation had begun 9 years earlier. Mrs. Grayson, now retired but still a dear friend, attended the small celebration we held after my first day. "Remember when you said you needed something that was yours alone?" she asked, raising her champagne glass in a toast. "Look at you now. I couldn't have done it without you," I replied sincerely. She shook her head. "No, Dorothy. You had it in you all along. Some women just need the right catastrophe to discover their power." In spring 1975, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at the Springfield Women's Business Association, a group that had pointedly ignored my existence during the divorce. The topic was property investment for women, but the real subject was transformation. As I stood at the podium facing 60 women of varying ages, I saw in their eyes what had once been in mine: uncertainty, hope, determination. "Ladies," I began, "conventional wisdom tells us that security comes from attaching ourselves to successful men. My journey taught me that true security comes only from what you build with your own hands and mind." For the next hour, I shared practical advice on property law and investment strategies, but beneath the technical information ran a more profound message. Catastrophe can become catalyst if you refuse to be defined by what's been done to you. Afterward, a young woman approached me, clutching a notebook filled with careful notes. "Mrs. Thompson, do you think it's really possible for someone like me to do what you've done?" I studied her eager face, seeing echoes of my younger self. "What's your name?" "Margaret," she replied. "Margaret Chen." "Margaret, the world is changing faster than most people realize," I told her. "The question isn't whether it's possible, but whether you're prepared to persist when others say it isn't." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "I believe I am." "Then yes," I said, smiling fully. "It's not only possible, it's inevitable." That night, alone in the home I had reclaimed and remade, I sat at my desk and finally penned a brief reply to Betty's letter from 3 years earlier. "The past has shaped us both. Perhaps someday we can speak of the future instead. Dorothy." The journey from betrayed wife to independent woman hadn't been straight or simple. There were still moments when grief ambushed me, when the children struggled with their divided family, when professional doors remained closed despite my qualifications. But at 42, I had built something no one could take away. Not a husband, not a sister, not even time itself. The unshakable knowledge of my own capacity to rise from ashes. As Dorothy Wilson, at 82, looking back on those transformative years, I can tell you this: sometimes the greatest act of love is the one you finally give yourself. Permission to become the woman you were always meant to be. If my story touched your heart today, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps share these real-life journeys with others who might need to hear them. I'd love to know what you thought of my story. Did it resonate with you? Leave a comment below telling me what part of my journey meant something to you. Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your own story.